My husband suggested I start this sermon by handing out pens and Post-it notes and asking you to write down on the Post-it note all the times that your anger has caused you to do something you feel really good about. That we should write down all the times we have spoken or yelled in anger and felt it was really quite successful. That we made our argument in such a coherent and convincing way that the other person changed their mind immediately. We should also list all of the times we ranted, raved, and raged on social media, and someone wrote back in the comments, "I am completely transformed by your words." And finally, we should write down all of the times we remember losing our temper, and we usually remember the really big ones. And whether or not those memories are bringing us a sense of contentment and joy. I'm guessing a lot of us would need a pretty small Post-it note. Now, this is not universally true, of course. There are some of us who would need more writing space. There's no doubt that some of us could write about times in our lives when our anger has moved us to do something important. Maybe anger has been a shield we use to protect ourselves or loved ones. Maybe anger was the force behind our telling of a hard truth that needed to be spoken. Maybe anger moved us to act on behalf of something or someone we love. But for some of us, I think probably many of us, anger is hard. We're afraid of it, so we try to avoid it in ourselves and others, no matter the cost. Or we feel overwhelmed by its intensity when it rises up in us. We may feel at the mercy of our own anger or at the mercy of the anger of others. In a lot of ways, our entire country is experiencing being at the mercy of the anger of others. We're living out the dangerous and devastating results of anger acted out, anger wielded without any empathy or compassion. Ironically or not, it is enraging. I spent some time this week on a website I really like called McSweeney's Internet Tendency. Do you read this too? So I was reading an article titled "Lest We Forget the Horrors," an unending catalog of Trump's cruelties, collusions, corruptions, and crimes by Emily Greenberg and Cliff Mayotte, who are carefully documenting every civil rights violation, every humanitarian, economic, environmental, and constitutional crisis now occurring in our country on a daily basis. The authors list the occurrences by date, starting on January 20, and they even include a handy color-coded key for the readers. For example, an entry is coded yellow for constitutional illegalities, collusion, or obstruction of justice. It is coded blue for lies and misinformation. It is coded black for white supremacy, racism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, and/or xenophobia, and so on. There are already 110 entries, most with at least 2 or 3 color codes, which I know because I read every single one of them. I don't know if this was my subconscious way of making myself really angry as I prepared to write this sermon, but it absolutely did the trick. I even sent a couple of you the link so you could be angry right alongside me, which I suspect was neither helpful nor useful. But the hours I spent poring over this catalog of horrors and internally seething did help me clarify some of the things I wanted to say to you about anger. And the first thing I want to remind you is that anger is just a feeling. It isn't good, it isn't bad, it isn't moral, it isn't immoral, it just is a feeling. Among all the other feelings, boredom, bliss, annoyance, joy, hunger, sleepiness, contentment, anger has many shades and degrees, from minor irritation to all-encompassing rage. But it's just a feeling. And it gives us information if we will pay attention to it, if we are willing to listen to it, to feel it, to sit with it, to entertain it, as the Sufi poet Rumi might say. Almost 800 years ago, he wrote these words: "This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. It may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in." Can you even begin to imagine meeting your anger at the door laughing? Can you imagine your anger, the feeling of it, just the feeling of it? Not the actions or the words you may have done or said in anger, but that feeling. Imagine it as a visitor, as an honorable guest, not an intruder, not a monster, not all the other names we call it, just a messenger with something very important to tell you. Because our anger is usually telling us that something feels wrong, that something we care about feels endangered or under threat. And I think this is why anger can feel so big and so urgent. I think this is why it is so easy to act on it or speak from it without pausing. I was talking to a colleague this week about anger, and they reminded me that most feelings only last 90 seconds in our bodies. They said that entire relationships have been damaged. Countries have probably been destroyed because we forget that 90 seconds. Our anger is not the problem. Anger doesn't cause anything. Anger doesn't do anything. It is what we do with it. What we say because of it. How we don't take the time to understand it. That is what causes the hurt, the regret. Acting out our anger is not the same as choosing how we will act on it. And acting out our anger is something we can learn to make choices about. But the first step is learning to respect our anger, to make a right-sized space for it, maybe to even befriend it a little bit, to meet it differently. I believe it will become far less frightening and difficult a guest if we do. I suspect if we invite our anger in and give it a place to rest in us, a place to be felt in us, it will do so much less damage. About 10 years ago, the Irish poet David Whyte published a little book called Consolations, the solace, nourishment, and underlying meaning of everyday words. And each chapter is this little gem, this little essay about a common word. He writes about ambition and beauty and rest and regret and shyness. And he just published a second volume in January that I haven't read yet. But the essay on anger is in volume 1, and it is powerful, and it offers such a different perspective on anger, at least to me, that at first I found it utterly strange. I had to read it a few times and just try to let it sink in. I had to try to understand it on some deeper level, and I hope that I can offer it to you in a way that is helpful. David Whyte writes, anger is the deepest form of compassion for another, for the world, for the self, for a life, for the body, for a family, and for all of our ideals, all vulnerable and all possibly about to be hurt. Stripped of reaction, anger is the purest form of care. The internal living flame of anger always illuminates what we belong to, what we wish to protect, and what we are willing to hazard ourselves for. This is such a startling thought to me, that our anger is also our compassion. How can that be true? Especially when we do such hurt to each other. We cause such pain and fear and anguish when we act out of our anger. And of course, anger can deepen and harden and calcify into hatred and contempt, and at its very far end, dehumanization. So how can anger be a form of compassion? I think what Whyte is saying is that the feeling of anger, not the words, not the actions or the reactions that come out of it, but the feeling is like a fire inside of us. And fire can burn and destroy if we let it, of course. But fire also gives life-saving heat and light. So our anger illuminates what we love and what we would risk ourselves to protect. He goes on to say what we name as anger may actually be the incapacity to sustain this deep form of care in our outer daily life. What we name as anger may be the unwillingness to be large enough and generous enough to hold what we love helplessly. to hold it in our bodies or our minds with the clarity and breadth of our whole being. What we name as anger may be the outer response to our own powerlessness. A powerlessness connected to such a profound sense of rawness and care that it can find no voice, no way of life to hold it. What we call anger is often the unwillingness to live the full measure of our fears, the full measure of our not knowing in the face of our love. Our anger breaks to the surface most often through feeling there is something profoundly wrong with this powerlessness and vulnerability. So I think what he means is that our anger is our response to being unable to fully hold both the depth of our love and our vulnerability. That it is so hard for us as human beings to care so much and to be able to control so little. And that our work as human beings is to learn to feel the full breadth of both our terror and our tenderness, to open ourselves to the full measure of our hope and our dread, our strength and our fragility. Anger is the response to our powerlessness in the face of how much we love. But knowing it, holding it, makes us more powerful and gives us more access to strength and more capacity for compassion. The social justice activist and writer I love, Valerie Kaur, says much the same thing in her beautiful book, See No Stranger. She has an entire chapter on rage, and she grew up believing that the opposite of love was rage. But as a young adult, healing from the wounds of sexual assault and the impacts of patriarchy and racism acted out, as she puts it, upon her small brown body, she realized this was a lie. She writes, the opposite of love is not rage. The opposite of love is indifference. Love engages all of our emotions. Joy is the gift of love. Grief is the price of love. And anger is the force that protects that which is loved. We cannot access the depth of loving ourselves or others without it. Nikita Gill, the young Irish Indian poet, reminds us the rage you are feeling comes from the same place in your heart as the love. That is why you refuse to accept a world where cruelty reigns. So maybe our anger could also be our blessing, illuminating all that we love, helping us to hold our strength and our vulnerability, and moving us toward greater compassion.